Welcome to the King and the Progress podcast. I am Mr. K.
And I'm Mr. P.
We are all informovers in that consuming information is an integral part of our modern daily life. We are informovers too, but of a different kind. What drives us is the epistemic curiosity.
For those unfamiliar with epistemic curiosity, don't worry. I wasn't familiar either until an hour ago when I Googled it.
Yeah, well done. Epistemic curiosity reflects a desire for new information that motivates exploratory behavior and knowledge acquisition. According to psychologist Littman, epistemic curiosity is an emotional motivation state that can involve positive feelings of interest associated with anticipation of learning something new, as well as unpleasant feelings of uncertainty due to lack of knowledge.
Yes, that's us. We want to explore complex ideas and ask novel questions. Sometimes we make ambiguous statements, and our ideas may be half baked, but our aim is to resolve discrepancies in our knowledge.
Absolutely. We're not as eloquent as Sam Harris, but we can promise you we will be more insightful than Kamala Harris on her best day. I am Mr. K.
And I'm Mr. P.
We give you the King and the Progress podcast. Welcome to the episode 4 of the King and the Progress podcast. I am Mr. K.
I'm Mr. P. Hello, Mr. K. How are things on the side?
Yeah, good. How are things with you, Mr. P?
So far, so good.
Good. Okay, so this is blink of the eye. We are already at the 4th episode, which is quite a resounding success for us because, irrespective of the number of views, we gained some good number of viewers and some subscribers over the last 3 episodes, which is, at least from the low bar that we set for ourselves, is a great success, right?
Good to hear.
I know. And then I've also been receiving some feedback in terms of our episodes that the audiences and spectators and friends, and although we both remain to be anonymous, and then that's the reason we're not sort of freely posting stuff within our circles, right? Because that defeats the purpose. But we just want an organic growth of audience based on the content, right? So some of the feedback that we received so far is that it's not the level of Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, and
we won't see them at any point of time.
Exactly. And I said, well, we're not that. If you really want to listen to those people, don't listen to us now because you'll be bored to death.
No, we can aspire to be them, but they are there.
Correct. So we're nowhere there. So at least we said it's at least the motto of our podcast is that we are laymen, but we're not normal laymen, but we are laymen with some epistemic curiosity and some knowledge, or curious about things and stuff. So we are a sort of amateur intellectuals, right?
Maybe we can tell me that I'm not sure about me. But
no.
You, yes.
No. But, okay, I'll rephrase it. We are aspiring to be amateur intellectuals, right?
Yes, always. That's always there.
We're not there yet, right? So if you really want deep content, then please listen to Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins and Eric Weinstein and Douglas Murray and these people, right? And then we just having this for fun. So you and me are talking just for fun, and then if we get some, and then we just want to vote it down to the level of a layman, so that it's no.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Those guys are on a higher level.
They're higher level.
Bigger folder. We are the subset of them. The consequence of those podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. So. Okay, so these are some of the feedback that we received from some of the subscribers and some of our friend circle, or the close friend circle we have. So on that note, so let's start this episode. So I think our previous episodes were more of an intro in terms of where you and I come from, right? And then we basically delved deep into our backgrounds from coming from from South India, and then the topics that we covered, which is the Hinduism or the history of Hinduism, right? And our sort of intellectual or rational roots in terms of why we both are non-religious, and then how we found a plane where we can discuss rationality and science and things like that, right? So and so now that we now set the scene that the reason we are discussing this is because you and I are sort of quite curious individuals in terms of try to understand the rationality and science and things like that. Maybe this episode, maybe we can just sort of have a chat about the seeds or the roots of rationality, right?
Nice.
And obviously every comfort that we currently enjoy today with the modern technology, the science, all the gadgets and everything else.
Science, math, thinking, politics.
The maths and everything else, right? So it's a result of curiosity mostly, right? Or the curiosity about the world and try to the acquisition of knowledge. And there's also a bit of serendipity involved in this, right? So curiosity is a necessary condition, right? But it's not a sufficient condition because sometimes the stars needs to align. For the lack of better term, we're not religious, but the stars needs to align. So think about this, right? So when you get an infection, a bacterial infection, and then you are in a real serious situation, your infection is quite bad, you go to your doctor and he prescribes penicillin, and then you come out on the other side fully clear of the infection, no pain, no infection and stuff, and then you thank your GP or your doctor for prescribing the medication, and that's it, and then we forget about it and we move on with life, go to a pub, have a few drinks, and that's about it, right? So but I think that the way you and I think is completely different, because so I just want to come up with the story of two Alexanders, and neither of them is the Alexander the Great, right? So Albert Alexander was a police officer in Oxford, England in 1940s, right? And he scratched his face on a rose thorn doing some gardening, right? Very basic stuff. He was just doing his gardening. I guess he was doing his gardening, right? And then he scratched his face on a rose thorn. So it's just a rose thorn that just scratched, and that led to a serious infection, right? And it's just that it's just a bacterial infection, and at the same time that Albert Alexander was suffering from this, another Alexander Fleming, right, was doing some experimentation on
during 90s, 20s.
It was in 1928, 1930, around that time. He was studying about staphylococci bacteria, right? And he was doing this research in London in St. Mary's Hospital. He had a messy laboratory, and he was doing some experiments and stuff. And then he just abandoned his work, and then he went on a 2-week vacation, right? And then he came back, and then some of his petri dishes where he was actually experimenting on this bacteria, right, became moldy because it was left for 2 weeks, maybe in summer or something like that. It got moldy, right? And then and that's about it. So what would you do? You just come back and you say, "Oh, all my petri dishes are moldy, so I'm gonna discard them into the bin," right? But then this is
any sane person would do that.
Any sane person would do that, but Fleming wasn't sane, right? But he was, because he's a curious individual. So he was curious about. He just did a close examination before he just discarded them, right? And then he had petri dishes full of bacteria, but around the bacteria were this mold colonies, right? And where it was infected, but it was where it was contaminated with the mold, right? He saw that the actual bacterial contamination was reduced, right? And he then realized that there's something here, that is just that with the mold growing there must be some sort of conflict between the mold and the bacterium.
As far as I remember, it's not that it grew reduced or something like that, but it did not grow. It's like they have their own territory, and it did not touch the other territory. It's a standoff there.
Yeah, you're correct. It wasn't as if it reduced it, but it stopped the territory of bacterium, which is expected to expand to the full of the petri dish, right? And then Fleming realized that this mold was secreting a substance that had antibacterial properties, right? So I mean, this is quite a serendipitous discovery, right? Which then led to development of penicillin.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge certain other thing also. Even, let's say, Jan Fleming, had he born in like 15th century or maybe 16th century, like where optics were not developed.
Alexander Fleming, not here.
He would have not. Sorry, Alexander. I always get confused. with
the James Bond novelist.
James Bond, We are Flemings at the end of that. I'll say like Mr. Flemings.
Yes,
okay. So he stood on the the benefits of the optics which were already there, the microscope, the compound microscope, and all, which were more developed at that point of time when he was doing this thing. So he stood on those things, and immunology it's not that he saw it for the first time. There were many scientists or many biologists who were looking into the microscope from late 18th century or maybe early 18th century. So it's that he was at the right place, right time, with the right mentality.
Exactly, but this is what I'm saying, where sometimes the curiosity itself is not enough, right? So, but you need a bit of luck. But the luck can only it can only help in a certain extent, because if you say that had he discarded the petri dishes to say that nothing to do with it, then it's not to say that we've never have had penicillin, but you would think
maybe 10-20 years later,
20-30 years, maybe there is another stroke of luck, or eventually, I mean, it would have happened given the advancement of science. So, but I think the reason I mentioned this is that the story of two Alexanders is that it's the background of the knowledge that you have. When you take antibiotics today, you take it for granted as if it's nothing, right? It's like, oh yeah, some random guy did something, but the fact that your mom or your loved one or your children are saved today, right? So it's just a scratch of a rose bush could kill people, right? As 70 to 80 years ago, right? Today, if you get a scratch, that you would probably won't even directly go to the doctor. You just go to a movie, right? Before you go to the doctor, because you know that the penicillin is out there to save you, right? So, and then I think this is where I think you and I are a little bit different, that we have this intense appreciation, right? For science and the awe and the wonder of science, and then we look back into the rear mirror and then we see that then the accident of history that you were born in in the late 20th century, right? And you're enjoying reaping all the benefits of science and rationality, right? Only that if you're if your birth was in the 1920s, then the death is only around the corner, right? I think this is the awe and the wonder that we express, and that's the reason we strive every day to learn more about science and the scientific progress and the rationalism. Again, this is underpinning why we started this podcast.
Correct. And while you're saying that, what I think of is I just went beyond these antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys, it was the need of the hour when they discovered certain things, but we are abusing those certain inventions.
No, that's correct. I mean, it's no different.
Antibiotics and all now. People just take it without any knowledge or no why they should take and why they must not take it.
Yeah, the thing is that especially this is more true of our Indian doctors, that it's almost prescribed like mint chocolate, right? So, or candies, to say that like you don't. So yes, I mean we are abusing the antibiotics to a certain extent.
That's the other side of the spectrum.
That's the other side of the spectrum, because but then again, if you understand anything about as a rational person, if you understand about how the antibiotics work, right? And then
be thankful for them, and again, don't abuse your power.
because you have to understand that it doesn't work for viruses and fungi, right? For example.
Yeah, they don't, like most of the people, they don't understand.
Yeah, assuming you understand that the bacteria, fungi, and viruses are completely different things. Bacteria is a complete cell with the DNA, whereas fungi is just an RNA, right? it's just a code. It's like virus is just a snippet of code, and it needs a host cell to replicate. Whereas
we had to educate at least once here and here and one.
This is correct, right? So so once you understood that, then if you have a cough, then you just don't take penicillin or antibiotics for fun, right? But
it destroys the genome or biome in the gut.
Correct, and it has that as well, right? So anyway, so I wanted to start with that story, the story of two Alexanders, right? So Albert Alexander. In fact, Albert Alexander, who was the first person to be treated with penicillin, right? Because and it worked. It worked, and as much as that, the whole of humanity is currently enjoying the benefits of penicillin.
Same with the polio, if I'm not wrong. More or less, there was a lot of story about.
But at least in the Albert Alexander's case, where he was the first patient to be administered penicillin, right? And it was successful. You know what? And eventually he succumbed to his infection, right? Only because they didn't produce enough penicillin, right? So because as part of the experiment, or just to they produced some penicillin. It wasn't easy to at an industrial scale. It wasn't easy to produce penicillin at that scale. So he died even if the treatment worked, right? But and then this was in the 1930s, but actually the penicillin was, and then everyone forgot about penicillin for 10 years, right? And it was only 10 years later that penicillin was produced on the industrial scale, only because of the World War, and then people were hit by, because the army, so they because of the World War. It's a benefit of the war that because of the war that lots of the soldiers were injured, and they were getting infection left, right, and center because they were fighting the war in the trenches and in the filthiest of the environments, right, on the Western Front. And this is when and then they basically asked the pharmaceutical companies to look into this, and then the penicillin was then made into more at an industrial scale and was used during the war, right? So, that's the story of Albert Alexander, who died of infection, very basic infection, and Alexander Fleming, who was the savior. And it's very hard to imagine how many millions or maybe even millions of lives he saved, right? Because of just one bit of curiosity to look at his petri dishes before discarding, right? And that's how it works, right? So, I mean, every comfort and every joy that we have currently today owes to these
probably, yeah, probably this field of science, field of medicine, on even the Darwin's discovery, Newton. It's all, I feel, not only it's serendipity, but it's one person thinking in a different way that made our civilization look in a very different direction.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and then I think the point of, at least for this episode, is that, and you and I were curious about, when did this all start, right? At what point in time in the history? Obviously, we were hunter gatherers and living in very hostile conditions, thinking about nothing else than gathering food for the next morning or later that evening, right? So, at what point in time, at what point in time that humanity collectively come together to say that, okay, we need to start thinking about knowledge. I mean, it's not that obviously knowledge was quite important to survive in such hostile conditions, and right. So if you remember that in the hunter-gatherer societies, right, and I think the average age of the mortality rate was something like mid-30s, right, for humans at the time.
You're talking about hunter-gatherers, or you're talking about Greek civilization?
No, hunter-gatherers, right? So before we formed any, even during even at the peaks of Greek civilization, it wasn't more than 40, right?
Yeah. So it various reasons, and
yes.
As Richard Dawkins said, we are like vehicles of our genes. So as and when we are of our reproducible age, we made some babies. That's all. The purpose is done, and chances are you will die in those ages. And so they just carried the genes.
That's partly true, but the other reasons for such a low mortality rate was also that we didn't have the advances of medicine at that age, in that day and age, right? Especially when we were hunter gatherers, and we and then we were very susceptible to wild animals, snakes, and things like that. And the biggest cause of death was just pregnancy, right? Because most people
you will Noah Harari. What I remember from his book is the way we were trying to, or the way we sent the information to our next generation, and we retained that knowledge, that saved most of the life, or they increased the lifespan for most of the time.
Correct.
It's not like science and something. Yes, it started probably 200, 300 years ago, like science. Philosophy maybe 1,000, 2,000. Yeah. Before that, the way we communicated, we stored our language, or saved our this thing, that saved us from imminent dangers.
That's correct. And then that's the reason that the village elders who lived until the age of 60, 70, 80, right? They were the most de facto, they were the most venerated people, because their experience is part to anyone, because they've seen things that the younger generations can learn from. You could basically eat a wrong mushroom and die, right? and
Yeah.
and then or you can eat a wrong nut that you found somewhere and then die. So when in doubt, the scientists of those ages were elders, right? So they used to go to the elders and say that, oh, you survived until 70, so you must have come across this, and then
Many things, yeah.
many things, and they were the ones. So, but because the knowledge without invention of writing or the reproducible books and things like that, the only way to collectively retain knowledge is to talk to the wisest person in the town, right? And that would usually be, because they were in schools at that age and no one was educated. So the wisest person in the town or your village is the one who lived the longest, right? And
There
the
is one other thing.
Yeah.
Fables, stories, maybe folklore, religion. Those were the things which carried information, saying that like beyond those mountains there is a dark forest.
Yeah.
Don't go into it.
Yeah.
So they for no reason won't question it. Like if there is something which the story says, let's not do it.
That's correct.
So that's the way. No animal in the animal kingdom does such kind of things. At least we know of. So probably that made us survive for a long time.
Correct. Yeah. So I think it's this is how primitive we were in terms of our knowledge acquisition, and in terms of how to store store the knowledge, the little knowledge that we had at the time, right? For the next generation, right? And then it all changed when we settled into cities, and then we formed civilizations, right?
Correct. When we started living, and there is one other thing I need to mention, like when I talk about these things, one of the revolutions humans have done is the pottery. Once they know how to make pottery, they know how to store the food. So once they know how to store the food, they know to settle in one place and hunt and come back to the same place. Then they started settling in villages, and few villages in certain cities or certain river banks. It came to be a town or a civilization, be it Indus Valley civilization, Euphrates, Greece, or whatever it is. Then started kingdoms, then empires.
Yeah, from chieftains, right? Initially with the chieftains, and it's very interesting that you invoked the concept of pottery, right? So, in fact, why when we were nomads, not settling in one place, right? Carrying any inventory, right, is not good for you, because the whole point of being nomads is just that if you find a place is quite dangerous, you can move to the next place. Imagine that you had hundreds of utensils made of pottery, right? It's basically it wasn't good, because then it's not easy for you to be mobile, right? But once we settled into a set of communities, utensils were great, because there's no other way that you can store whatever you foraged, right? So if you forage some nuts and seeds and things like that, and then the pottery made all the difference. Obviously, there wouldn't be pottery without fire, right, or a wheel and things like that, right? So, but and then I'll come back to the pottery in terms of we'll touch upon the concept of pottery at a later point in time, right? But once we started civilization, and we had kings, and we all settled in one place, and we had farming, at least, which started in the Fertile Crescent around, I think it was something like around 12,000 BC, right? And then farming farming gave rise to stability, where we don't have to hunt or forage for food, but you can actually grow the food so that the food supply, you have food supply for the next few months, right? That means that you can settle in one place. And obviously with all the pottery and stuff, you can store the grains, and you can do lots of other stuff, right? So and then the advanced civilizations, the Greek civilization.
No, we missed a step there. So the point I want to put there is between this pottery and kings, the storage and kings and all, there came classifications in the civilizations, or maybe like you do the farming, I will do the protection, and others will do the administration tasks. So what happened is people had time to think, people had time to indulge. So there were lesser wars and all. So these thinkers were somewhere in between kings and the people who worked.
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
So then we had the privilege to think about the world which is around. Until then, we were busy defending ourselves, busy not dying.
Yes, that's correct, because we were on the lower ladders of the Maslow hierarchy, right? We were just the first level is just to take care of food, home, and shelter, right? And no one cared where the knowledge comes from, how to to think about the meaning of life and the purpose of life and things like that, because you have other priorities to say that when am I going to get my next meal, right? Before I understand why do I exist, right? So that's correct. I mean, there's few steps before we reached the level of intellectual thought, right? And interestingly, right, most of the rigor and the intellectual discussions happened always around the fireplace, right? Because the whole community gathered around a fire, right?
And the exchange of thoughts, maybe dialogue.
In the evening, when there is no natural light, and there's no heating and stuff. So, and the only way to scare the animals around is to gather around a fire, and then you cook around the fire, and then you sing, and then you exchange all the communal bonding around the fire. And then you had elders who are like pontificating on things, and then it's a campfire is where most of the discussions happened in the past, right? So, and then you're right, and there are further steps in terms of chieftains, and then they thought, because it was at those times, at least, it was more egalitarian culture, that everyone was equal, right? You had a group of 100, 200 people who formed a community, and they go as a nomadic culture. You found a place in a forest or somewhere else where you say that, okay, let's go and forage the surroundings. But then again, you settle in one place, and then eventually what happened is that you get into some sort of conflicts with your neighbor to say that, hey, this resource is mine and this resource is yours, right? And they say that because there weren't land deeds or law to say that this is yours, or everything relied on mutual understanding, the kinship and the altruism, right? And then and then you're right that they had to form a division of labor to say that, okay, you and I have a conflict. There's two ways to solve the issue, that we either go into the conflict and kill each other, right? And that is not good for the community spirit. So they said, look, this is the dispute that we have. I say that this pottery is mine, right? And someone else says this piece of land is mine, and then we get into an argument.
Women, especially,
a woman to say that she's mine, and so on and so forth. So they said, okay, rather than we fighting we fighting, so we just outsource this to an elderly man, right? Someone with some additional knowledge, more
One who can arbitrate,
who can
who's more
arbitrate,
wise.
yeah, who can arbitrate, right? And who can say that no, you just listen to me. I think that this is the fair justice. So we basically outsourced all our conflict resolutions to someone, at least to someone in the village or the little town you were, and then these became the chieftains, right? And they were saying that, okay, if you want me to adjudicate and arbitrate between the conflicts, then you pay me something, right? I'm not doing it for free. So, and then they became chieftains, and everyone used to go and offer him whatever, right? To say that you don't do any work, we'll do the work, but you just arbitrate. And then that's the first chieftain. And then the extension of a chieftain at a later point in time is a king, right? And this is where the first concept of taxes, not taxes in cash, but taxes in kind, right? So he was saying that
king needed somebody to enforce and bring the tax back
exactly,
and account.
Exactly, he needs someone to take care of the conflicts, come and inform him what's happening. So he needs to pay them. So he said that, okay, the whole community pays me in grain and then some meat and some other stuff, right? And then, in fact, I'll pay my administration people, right? The bureaucrats of that time. And then, so that's the concept of the first concept of a tax, where you have to give away part of your income or part of your stuff, right? To the chieftains. And then this started, and then over the period of time, we started to grow from one small community to bigger communities, and then at some point in time we have a civilization, right? And once we settled into civilization, then we had protection. There was people who were relatively wealthy, right? Not in today's terms, but at least when
in that point of time,
they compared to their nomadic life, right? And then I think there was some. Obviously, there was always conflict between two kingdoms or civilizations and things like that. But and then once a civilization reaches a certain level of maturity, and there's peace, and there is that everyone is going about their lives. And then you have a concept of a civilized society, right? I think this is when people had time to move from the lower ladders of Maslow hierarchy, from just food, home, and shelter, to think about the higher stuff, right? To say that, okay, so now I don't have to worry about food, home, and shelter. Now I've got a family. Okay, and things like that. And then say, okay, what is the meaning of all this, right? So, and they try to explain, or at least they try to inquire about what is the point of all this, right? So, because they had spare time, they didn't have to constantly hunt and then protect themselves. They had lots of spare time for leisure. They had spare time to spend with the family, to form bonds with friends and things like that. And then when a civilization has attained a certain level of maturity, at the point that they say that, okay, now we can take a deep breath, pause, and think about deeper things, right? I think these are the initial seeds of rationality and deep thinking, right? And
I also sometimes think, we talk about, let's say, Aristotle or Greek civilization or anything. the advantage of that civilization is those what you call the thoughts were recorded. There would have been much more people who thought in a different way, but it's not recorded or it's destroyed, so we won't be knowing it.
Yes, not in all. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, I think at least by the times we reach the Greek civilization, where I think we have to give it to the Greeks, right?
Just because we are able to retrieve, or it's recorded and we are able to retrieve that knowledge.
At least what is recorded in history, right? It's not to say that there were more deeper thinkers before that, but at least from what we know from the written
that's what I want.
That is a starting point, right? So,
correct.
And from the Hellenistic culture, right? So, it's not to say that, I mean, the peak of Greek civilization was between somewhere from 300, 400 BC to 200. So from 800 BC to 200 BCE, right? And then that's when the Roman civilization started around 200 or maybe 100 BCE, right? So,
out of curiosity, Mr. K, Indian civilization was much more, not advanced, I can say, much more older than Greek civilization. Do you think that our records were destroyed, or like it's that our Indians never ventured into philosophy and all?
No, we did. So, very interestingly, I think we touched upon in one of our earlier episodes that at least the old Hinduism or the earlier form of Hinduism or the Vedic Hinduism is very similar to the Greek mythology, or the mythological aspects of Hinduism is very similar.
I'm talking about rational thinking.
I'll come to that, right? So what I'm going to say is that the Greek civilization was quite advanced in its age, right? And then during the same contemporary period, the Indian civilization was also quite advanced, right?
Ashoka, when was Ashoka and all like that?
Around 50, around the I think the Chandragupta Maurya was something around 200 BCE, right? And even when Alexander the Great came to attacked India, and this was before. I think it was around. I can't remember the exact date. Someone can check this. Right, it was around 100 to 50 BCE. Right, so and then we had advanced civilizations as well in terms of both philosophical thought, right? In terms of we had the Mauryan Empire, which is as sophisticated as the Greek empires, right?
If not more.
I mean, it's very similar, right? So, if you look at the Greek civilization, for example, if you look at the Greek philosophers who basically set the stage for rationality and epistemology, right? To understand knowledge and to codify knowledge and to try to understand the nature of the world, the nature of reality, and things like that. So it was more, if I remember it correctly, right? It all started around roughly around 600 BCE, right? And
which one? Sorry,
the Greek.
I'm just still stuck with these Mauryas and all. Chanakya,
yes. So
Chanakya is also a philosopher from 300 BC.
Correct. So I think there's just that the philosophical thoughts of the ancient Greek was very similar to the philosophical schools of India, right? And we touched upon some of that philosophical schools in our earlier episode, and they were contemporaries. It's not that it was around 600 BCE to 200 BCE, right? So if you look at the Greek philosophers at that time, right? So usually the philosophical age is usually divided into pre-Socratic, right, and post-Socratic. So from Socrates and to Plato and Aristotle is the post-Socratic philosophers, and before Socrates, I think it was pre-Socratic philosophers were Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and I can't remember another one. All right, so
good that you mentioned about Anaximander. I did not know about this guy.
Yeah,
and he has done many fuss, and I just read about him like in the last 6 months or 1 year, and it's surprising that nobody ever mentions about Anaximander.
Yes, I mean it's
at least I did not read our books and all.
Yeah, because it's the pre-Socratic thinkers are not as widely known, apart from Pythagoras, because everyone knows Pythagoras from the Pythagoras theorem, right? But Pythagoras was around 570 to 495, 570, around 600 BCE, right? We only know about Pythagoras, but we don't know. It's not very widely known about the pre-Socratic thinkers like Thales and Anaximander, right? And their thought processes, right? That much, right? And just a disclaimer for any of the listeners that neither Mr. K nor myself or Mr. P we are not philosophers of any depth, right? We
no, we are not.
Yeah, we're not. So although I am a little bit more I'm not saying knowledgeable, but I have a little bit of more interest in philosophy, whereas Mr. P,
then yes, that's not my forte.
It's not your forte. You rather read about cosmos and and the modern science,
more contemporary stuff.
Yeah, but because one of my hobby horses is history, so I have a little bit more insight into the old philosophical stuff than you have, but you read pretty much every book on modern science, right? But I don't do that.
More applications. So
because of the bandwidth issues and stuff, right? So Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Parmenides are the pre-Socratic philosophers, right? And from Socrates and his student Plato and Plato's disciple Aristotle are post-Socratic philosophers, right? And if you look at, for example, the Indian philosophical thoughts or Indian philosophical schools, right? They are very similar in terms of the thought process that Greeks had, right? They have
this comes to a hypothesis. Sometimes I think it's a thought I have. Was there a trade between Greeks and Indians at that point of time? If yes, don't you think this?
Because neither you or I are historians, right? So I can't think of. I mean, it could be that there's this concept of parallel evolution, right? So both the birds developed
evolution is
flight with basically the evolution of feathers, right? But mammals, especially bats, also evolved flight, but actually the bats fly with their fingers. It's a scaled skin between the fingers that basically make them fly, yep. Right? So there is this parallel evolution that two things or two almost implausible things can evolve completely independently. One in mammals with bats, and at the same time, and with birds and dinosaurs. Right? That so. I mean, it could be that once two civilizations, both Indian and Greeks, at its pinnacle.
No, I'll tell you like what's it's circumstantial. I get it. Correlation is not causation, but the gods are similar. Probably the math is similar. The astronomy, the philosophy, you always find more or less overlap. So,
no, I mean, this is something maybe that we might have to talk to some historians who can shed more light on this, right? So, for example, if you we touched up, there are 6 schools of philosophical thoughts in India, right? So there Nyaya, which is more based on logic, right? And then we have Vaisheshika, which is another branch of philosophy. It's attributed to Sage Canada, right? It's basically we call sage, right? At least from an Indian point of view, but the sages are equivalent to the philosophers of Greece like Aristotle, right? So, and if you look at the Indian philosophical school of thought, which is Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and Samkhya, right? They're all around 6th century BC, exactly at the same time of the pre-Socratic philosophers like Anaximander and Thales, right? And there are also lots of commonality, right, between how Greeks thought at that particular point in time, right, and then how the Indian schools of thought. So, for example, Socrates, for example, right? Socrates, interestingly, has never written a book, right? So Socrates was killed in 399 for basically asking very basic questions of life, right? So he was the one who was just going around Greece, right, asking a question of why, right? A very simple three-letter word. Why do you think a certain way, right? So it's basically he was the first one who was asking these very basic why questions, and he would go around the town and then say that, can you define justice, for example, or something like, can you define courage, right? And someone would come to him and say, oh, courage is endurance, right? So to endure something. And it's like, oh, do you think that's what courage is? And like, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. So let us say that you're a trader, right? And you're making losses, right, in your business, and you endure losses, right? So what happens at the end of the endurance? That you go broke, right? So endurance is not courage. The courage is to, when you're making losses, you basically do not endure, in fact, but you say that that's it, I'm not doing this anymore, and then you change tack. So, and they say, oh yeah, that's fine. So what is courage? Courage is not endurance. Okay, what is it then? Oh, courage is bravery. And then you say that, okay, if it is bravery, then he goes into this deeper thinking, and then he goes into different examples. For example, he says like, what is kindness, right? And he says, oh, kindness is something, the virtue of helping others, right, or helping anything. And they say, okay,
book, right? The dialogues of Socrates or something like that, or is it somebody else?
It's a
Plato.
So Socrates used to ask these questions, and Plato was his disciple, right? And and Socrates during his sort of, he was one of these guys. He doesn't need money or anything. He was just looking at the world and try to understand the world, ask these deeper questions. And the other example he was, I can't remember, is just along these lines, is that is like, what is kindness? Can you define kindness? And it's like, it's not as if that he's just questioning for questioning's sake, but what he's saying is that, how do you know what you know? Right? I think this is the foundation of epistemology, right? So the Greek philosophers were dealing with kind of three branches of philosophy. One is the metaphysics, so which is basically what exists, right? And why is it that something exists, for example, right? So that's one school of thought, to say what exists. And then you basically do some, say that, okay, sun exists, and then okay, and things like that. And then you have the other branch of philosophy, right? So as I said, one is metaphysics, which is pondering about the nature of reality and what are the fundamental principles that governs it, right? And again, it's and then you have epistemology, right? So once as you know that when you start asking those questions and you gain knowledge, right? And then epistemology basically says that, what do you know? How do you know that you know something, right? So how can you get to the bottom of that? What you know is the right thing, right? And then you have the other branch of philosophy, which is ontology, right? So
Ontology.
Okay. So ontology basically says that it categorizes and organizes the stuff that we already know, right? So if I say for example, let us take a simple example, right? And study of gravity, right? So we understand gravity today because of Einstein and Newton, right? How did our understanding of study of gravity came about? It would have been possible without the philosophical thoughts, right? So if you look at the metaphysics, right? So ancient philosophers might have asked the questions like, why do things fall down instead of up, right? And this is pretty much the same question that Newton had, right? To say that why is the apple coming down rather than going up, right? So that question basically delves into the nature of reality, and what are the fundamental forces that govern it, right? And then comes the epistemology, right? So as people thought about these questions, right, to say that what pulls objects towards the earth, this leads to some sort of observation and experiment, such as you drop several objects and observe their motion, right? And you gather some evidence, and to say that, okay, always it comes down, right? And then you could do other experiments, such as that you drop a ball, which is 20 kilograms, right? And then you drop a ball which is just a grape, right? And they both sort of hits the floor at the same time, right? Assuming it's not a windy day or things like that, right? So again, this is epistemology, is that how do we know that gravity exists is through the observation and experiment, right? And then once you have these two, then you have the ontology, right? To say that you can say that it's just a classification and organization of what you already know, right? And then obviously you can say that, okay, two objects, for example, the relationship between the two objects, where when Newton came up with the law of gravitation, right? That the force of attraction between the two bodies is a multiplication of the masses, and then inversely proportional to the radius, square of the radius.
Distance between
that. So this is the effect of ontological thought in terms, because you classify objects as there's a bigger object, there's a smaller object, and there's a relation, the distance between them, and things like that. So, and you could also expand exactly the same thing. For example, we started this episode with the invention of penicillin, right? So the metaphysics side of philosophy would have asked questions of what causes disease, right? Why do people die of painful conditions with pus oozing out of their organs, right? At least in the when we didn't have microscopes, or when we didn't know that, when there's no germ theory of disease,
we have like hypothesis.
We had hypothesis, but we say that what causes the diseases. The very question of what exists, why some people have died. So this is the question for the metaphysics part of the philosophy, right? And and then comes the epistemology, as the medical practitioners try to understand, how to treat infections, and then say that, okay, imagine that you find a herb in a forest. You basically rub that herb or some sort of concoction, and then it cures, right? It cures some people, it doesn't cure some people, and then you do basically do some empirical observations, right? And then
you're saying I'm thinking about two other things also. One is mathematics, those like theorems and all later. Those things came later, but the thought probably originates here. And also the common laws, like how to solve a problem, what is justice, what are certain things. So first it comes into the thoughts, then they segregate and say that this is how it has to be. You put certain observations, feedback, then it comes to a law.
Yeah, I mean,
so
that is all. Yeah. That is those. Yeah, so the observations, and again we will touch upon maybe. It's just that we're running out of time. I think we should probably continue this in another episode, right? Or we can continue our discussion, because we've been taking several twists and turns, try to grapple with
meandering around. Probably that is the part of this.
Yeah, that's the fun part of the conversation, because we're not.
It can't be linear.
It can't be linear because we're neither historians nor philosophers nor scientists. So we are none of the above, but we're just sort of rehashing what we know in real time, right? And then trying to basically. It's basically we're playing a game where we just lots of dots, and then we are trying to put the dots together and to form a line, right? So I think we're digressing and things like that. But I think at least for our viewers, right, that we are trying to find a coherent picture with the very little knowledge that we have. But again, as you said, we are both curious people, right? So we just want to form a coherent picture of how we got here today, right? And without this level of deep level thinking, especially from the point of metaphysics and the epistemology and the ontological branches of philosophy, right? We wouldn't have come this far, that today with the click of a button that you could transmit a message.
It's like I see anywhere between 2 2,000, 3,000, if not more, years of thinking of great people, and we other people parsing it and making sense for this. So we are standing on the thoughts of great philosophers, great scientists. We are what we are because of them. That's what I am always thankful for those guys.
Every comfort that we enjoy today owes to curiosity of some of these great individuals, right? So
and people who failed, these guys are successful. These guys are
successful. I mean, they could
there are many people who failed.
Yeah, but
and we learn from those failures.
Maybe there were other people who had very similar thoughts that were never recorded in the history, right? So
even recorded. I'll tell you certain things, like people vehemently opposed certain thoughts, like of Darwin, or be it Einstein. When he proposed certain theories, people said that this is not right and all, and later realized that this is how we have to deduce the equations, and this is the truth. So we learned from those people who have opposed it. So so I feel the other side is also important. Our heroes are important, and also the people who opposed our heroes. So we know why our heroes are heroes because of them.
That's correct. I mean, it all started. I think we're coming to the end of the episode. I think it's good to remember some of those great lives. And I think Socrates is probably is someone who we should all thank for, because he never published anything, right? So most of what we know of Socrates is not from, because Socrates didn't write a single thing. He was just asking these very deep rooted questions to the society, and in fact, so the Socratic method is called the dialectical method, right? Which basically involves asking probing questions to stimulate critical thinking, right? And as I was saying, like he asks this deep probing question of define something like justice, and then the other guy comes up with some assumptions of what the justice are, and then he basically shed some light to say that, okay, your assumptions of what justice is not correct, and then let's define justice in a better way. So basically, it's a dialectic where I ask you a question, you make some progress, but not a full progress. But okay, let's try it again, right? And then you come up with another step to try to explain it, and you try to, and then you come up with another step, and then you at least from his point of view, he says that it's very not easy to come up with things like justice and beauty and courage and things like that we take for granted, but there's lots behind it, right? So that's the Socratic method, which is the dialectical method of trying to get to a bottom of understanding a very simple things, right? And unfortunately, he was, and this caused lots of fuss, because this went against the disrespecting the gods of Greece, the Greek at that time, right? And Socrates was sentenced to death in 399 BCE.
Not surprised.
And that's the censorship of those days, right? So
and now people complained about government being censoring journalists.
The censoring business is nothing new. It continues to today, and this is why I like history, because I'm very, very anti censorship, right?
Let's make an episode on then Edward Snowden.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Maybe sometime.
Julian Assange also.
Yeah, so I don't care what the other guys say, right? So he can come up with even nuclear grade bullshit. I don't care, right? As a society, if you are intimidated by some stupidity of others and you want to censor them, and you don't have any arguments on your side to counter that bullshit, and you want to censor them, then that means that you don't have balls to stand up to bullshit, right? So don't censor them. Let them speak their mind. Let them let them.
Thoughts are different.
Correct.
I'm talking about national security. Let's say there is someone who wants to say certain things, and certain sect of people get instigated by it, and there will be a law and order situation. So even then, you are for the freedom of speech.
I think there's always limits to there's nothing called absolute freedom of speech or something.
I get it. Yep.
Yeah,
yep,
but
yep.
There are limits.
Yeah, in a general sense, yes.
Yes. Yeah. But what I'm going to say is that it's just that the censorship business is not something new, right? It's been there since time immemorial, right? So, and Socrates was tried for, and he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens because he was asking these deep questions, and people were like, "Oh, these questions need to be answered," and they were like, he was sowing the seeds of.
Maybe at that point of time, it's a law and order problem.
No, but again, this is exactly the same. It's you. I mean, if you say that Edward Snowden needs to be excommunicated for law and order problem, that means that as a society, if you think that one random person can disrupt law and order, that you don't have the capacity or the belief or the confidence to counter that with your counter arguments, right? So, again,
I'll tell you one other test case here. This guy, Elon Musk, he has bought the Twitter and he let all the Trump supporters say whatever they want on Twitter. And these COVID guys, whatever they want to say, all the fake news, it's open platform there. So, do you think it must be like that, irrespective if they want to peddle some fake news or anything, alternative science?
No, but I mean, with imagine that you're worried that E is equal to mc square is going to be the concept of the mass and energy relationship is going to be destroyed by some random lunatic who comes up to say that everything is water, right? For example. Now, how do you say that? Oh, I want you to censor this guy who says that there's no.
No, it's not possible.
I mean,
humanly,
it's like you either have the balls to and the confidence and you know the conviction to say that you know what you can come with any nuclear grade bullshit. I have a better answer for your thing, and then if you do not have that confidence and the only thing for you to do is that because some guy is spreading misinformation and you don't have the tools, then you will, I mean, at what time will it stop, right? There is always be one nutter, right? There's always be people who have bad thoughts or pseudoscientific explanation of things, but the only way to and you don't censor them. You just say that okay, you air your dirty laundry, right, in the public, and then I will come up with the proper cleaning liquid, right? So if you don't have the conviction and then you think the censorship is a problem, then I don't think it's not that you censor two people and then that's the end of the equation. There's always be some nutter propping up somewhere, and then okay, I think we're digressing a bit, but what I meant to say is that
So going back to Socrates,
going back to Socrates, irrespective of what he said, he was sentenced to death for the corrupting the youth of Athens because he was asking this deep questions, and he was asked to say that okay, and then everyone knew that Socrates were a very wise guy, but they couldn't stand up to his wisdom. So he was sentenced to death, and I think he was given an option to leave Athens and to move somewhere. But he said, no.
Or drink poison.
Yeah, or drink poison, the hemlock. And he said, no, I'll happily drink hemlock because I would rather not run away from the deeper questions. But I would rather so. And then he drinks poison, then he dies, and his execution is depicted by his disciple Plato in his dialogue called Apology, I think, if I remember correctly, right? So, and then actually everything that we know of Socrates, right, is from Plato, because Plato wrote the Republic and the Apology, and then yes, and then Plato basically basically the whole of Republic and his books is basically a student teacher conversation where the teacher is always Socrates and people were asking him questions and the dialogues and stuff. So if everything we know about Socrates today is through Plato, right?
Quick question before I forget. Why is that we are not able to see, or at least you must be knowing, I did not see, we don't see philosophers nowadays. When I say nowadays, last 50 years, maybe last 100 years.
No.
Why is that we always invoke those guys?
No, I mean, it's not that we don't see philosophers, because the science used to be called natural philosophy, right? Even during the times of Darwin, right? He was a natural philosopher, right? That means that he was trying to explain. He is trying to explain things around the things that he sees. It's a philosophy of the nature, right? It's a study of nature, right? And what we do today is exactly the same. It's the study of nature, trying to understand how nature works and how to mold the nature to our needs. And then we invented the thermodynamics and refrigeration and things like that, part of thermodynamics. So it's not that most of the scientists are philosophers in one sense, right? Because they use exactly these the foundations of metaphysics and ontology and epistemology in order to explain the theories and to come up with the explanations of the world, right? It's not to say that there are no philosophers anymore. For example, Sam Harris, I would.
No, is there nothing new to say, or like, is it that
no? I mean, I don't know the answer to the question, because you have David Deutsch, who I follow. He's and most of the philosophers today who do some philosophy are mostly physicists, right? And neuroscientists. Someone with a lab coat doing experimentation on doing some CRISPR gene therapy. Okay, they're probably not getting into philosophy to that level, right? Yes, but the field of philosophy is still. One of the most prominent philosophers, at least of the 20th century, is Karl Popper, who died in the mid 90s, right? And obviously there are lots of podcasts and stuff, but philosophy is such a is such a deep level of introspection and investigation that is not on radar of everyone else, right? So, for example, you are more into understanding the advances in science, in cosmology, and because you read, I know from what you share offline, right? On books on cosmology and books on evolution and genetics and and things like that. So you at least your bandwidth is pretty much is limited to, because there's lots of things to know in the world, right? So you
say that there are people there, but for example, not getting the platform, or I am not seeking them.
Yes, you're not seeking them, but it's not that I am deep into philosophical thoughts and things like that, but it's something that I keep an eye on, right? It's again, it depends upon our temperaments and our curiosities, and we have different set of curiosities, right? So, and philosophy is something that I mean, if I had the bandwidth and the time, and it's something that I would rather go into deep into this, but I don't have this time with everything that's going on, right? So, no, you're right that, I mean, it's like asking, why is there no Socrates of this day, right? No, I mean, there isn't, but maybe in 2000 years, right? People would look at Sam Harris, for example, and they say, oh, we had Sam Harris, Socrates in the past, right? So it's again, it's not easy to identify people of that deep philosophical thoughts these days, right? But there are people, right? So so I think we should conclude. We are hitting the 1.5 hour mark, right? So so we touched upon the initial roots of rationalism, and the curiosities of the Greeks. I think we should continue probably on this topic in the next episode. Probably at least try to get into, so maybe we can get into some of the thought processes of both pre-Socratic philosophers and post-Socratic, all the way to the medieval philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas, who tried to sort of try to merge the Orthodox Christian theology, right, with the ancient Greek philosophies, and then nothing happened during the Dark Ages, and then at least from the Renaissance, at least from the 15th centuries, we probably can go deeper into the philosophical thoughts of René Descartes, and Spinoza, and the 17th century great English philosophers, John Locke, David Hume, and again, there's lots of contributions. Again, some of the later philosophies also talks about political philosophies, right? In terms of what would make a better ruler, or how should the societies needs to be structured.
Make a better ruler.
Exactly, and I would say exactly so. So again, from John Locke to David Hume and Francis Bacon, and some of the very recent philosophers like Karl Popper. So maybe it'll be good for us to maybe dig deeper into what was going on in the minds of these great people, right? Which led to the more modern rational thought and the scientific processes that we all enjoy the fruits of, right? So, so we're running out of time. I think it's been a blast, Mr. P, right? We need to, so we sort of meandered our way into different lanes.
That's what I want. That's what I like.
So, so we just improvising as we speak. So, hopefully there is some coherence in terms of what the message that we wanted to convey, right? So I think this sets a good foundation in terms of the deeper subjects that we want to go into, right? So maybe in the next episode we can go into the minds of these philosophers in terms of what they were saying and then how it is relevant to our daily lives. Yeah. So,
Okay.
anything else you want to say?
Nothing.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So that concludes our episode 4 of The King and the Progress. I am Mr. K.
I'm Mr. P.